Here's a really great question. I hope you can answer this one. Greg Davis, how do you take away rear mechanical grip? And maybe we should explain what mechanical grip is really quick, so we're on the same sheet of paper.
Yeah. Okay. So I think this question is coming because Mike actually mentioned this, not in passing, but he didn't go down a rabbit hole with this. This is an absolute rabbit hole. Like, this may be a topic we bring up with Mike on the next time we have him on.
Yeah, because mechanical grip is a huge part of what we deal with.
This could be a 30-minute segment, frankly. Like, you can go way down the rabbit hole on this. So I'll try to talk briefly about this. I think it is generally assumed that more mechanical grip is better almost always. And in a lot of scenarios, yes, we are trying to maximize mechanical grip. Mechanical grip just means the loads that you can put into the tire, the way that you can load the tire, are you doing it in such a way that you are maximizing the amount of grip coming from the tire, right? It's almost like, take out the idea of, is it a really grippy compound? Is it a really grippy surface? Is it like, take that out for a second and just think about what are we doing with the bike in terms of load transfer and things like that actually would create more grip. Because remember, grip isn't just the friction between the rubber and the tire and the ground. It's how much load can I put into it.
Right. And the load creates what's called keying, where the tire's actually deforming into, and they're actually locking together.
Mushing into the little deviations in the asphalt. Yeah. So when we talk about mechanical grip, that's more what we're referring to, is how much load am I able to get into the tire in the right way. Oftentimes when we talk about mechanical grip or sort of tuning mechanical grip, modifying it, it's very rarely on well, you can do it on the front end too, but let's talk about the rear specifically.
That's usually where it comes up.
Because it's normally where we're talking about. So you would say, oh, well, why wouldn't you always want the most amount of grip you can get possible out of the rear? That would make sense. And to a point, that's true. You do want as much grip on the rear as you can when you're driving and accelerating. The problem is, if you run the swing arm position in a certain place, or the angle of the swing arm pivot, or the angle of the swing arm in a certain way to maximize mechanical grip, which is sort of like the squatting and loading of the weight into the rear tire, you may get so much that the bike actually doesn't want to turn. Because a lot of times, especially in track riding, but street riding too, a lot of times you're turning, whether you think about it or mean it or not, is coming from the rear tire slipping slightly.
Right. Slip angle is a big part of how I did a whole video on like how two-wheel bikes turn. Yeah. This is such a complicated issue. I didn't even touch it in the video.
Yeah.
Because slip angle on a curved tire, it's like,
on a motorcycle that leans, like there's so many factors to this. But if you have a rear tire that is, imagine for a second that the tire is Velcro to the ground, right? It is absolutely not sliding in the least. Any bit of turning that it can do through a corner requires the whole machine to literally turn through the corner. Now, if you think about what's actually happening as you're accelerating through the latter part of the corner, that rear is spinning and sliding, kind of drifting around to finish the turn. Again, most of the time when this happens to you, because it is absolutely happening to everybody on the street, on the dirt, on the track, wherever, it's happening in a very controlled, very mild way. The problem if you have too much mechanical grip is it won't do that. It basically feels like the rear squats and digs in so hard that now it won't finish turning, and the front will almost lose traction and you'll kind of understeer. So where you would think, oh, well, if I just add some throttle, I can kind of like pivot around and get the bike to turn through the corner. It will dig in. It kind of leans into the rear tire so hard that the front loses grip. And now the front's actually the one that's sliding across the asphalt, and you're understeering coming out of a corner. So that's what Mike is talking about. Again, most of the time we are trying to maximize grip where
everything's like, to a certain point, it depends, right? And if you've ever done a track day, or you've been behind your buddy on a good canyon ride and you've watched him accelerate out of a corner and you see a little black line, he's not spinning the tire, right? He's not drifting out of the corner. You're just seeing the tire working as intended, where you're getting a little bit of that slough of the rubber. You're seeing that little bit of slippage to finish the corner.
Now, how do you go about that? There's a lot of little mechanical things that we do in order to change mechanical grip. I think this is probably where we'll get into it with Mike more later, but this can be things like if you think about the bike front, nose to tail, if you move the rear axle back further in the swing arm adjuster, what you're doing is you're effectively moving the center of mass forward, right? Because you made the wheelbase a bit longer. That would take away some mechanical grip because there's literally just more weight on the front than the rear.
I think a lot of people don't think of it that way. They would think a longer swing arm would give you more rear grip because you have like this fulcrum. So it's a
further
little
out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little ironic to think that no, extending my swing arm, like it's for a drag bike versus a track bike.
And I think that's probably where it comes from is kind of, we picture drag bikes with these big long swing arms. That's just to keep the front end down. That's the whole reason they do it. But yeah, if you move the axle back, you are going to get less weight onto the rear tire as you accelerate. So there's less mechanical grip. There's also things that you can do with these. And now not every bike can do this, but if you have a bike that has an adjustable swing arm pivot, really when you're adjusting the swing arm pivot, the main thing you're able to do is change the swing arm angle. That can also affect your mechanical grip. So to a certain extent, typically speaking, if you're starting from normal angles within a bike, the lower you can make the swing arm pivot, the flatter the swing arm angle is going to be. And the swing arm angle is just the angle from the horizon from the swing arm pivot to the axle. Okay, that's the angle we're talking about. The closer that is to level when it's static, the more mechanical grip you're going to get typically. And
it gets really complicated too, because now we're getting into like squat and pro squat and the
chain
forces
drive
of what the chain does to these things. That's why like all of these answers are really, it does depend because there's a gazillion variables you have to account for.
Yeah. But that's in a nutshell. I think hopefully I'm answering your question, but when we talk about why would you ever want to change mechanical grip?
He says, how do you take away mechanical grip?
Yeah.
Right.
So all of these things would impact that. It's basically thinking about how does the weight transfer onto the rear tire. That is what creates the mechanical grip. So if you do things that allow it to, less weight gets transferred, and that can be things, even things as simple as changing the size of sprockets that you're running will change that, right? Because the angle of the chain, the pull of the chain as you accelerate versus the swing arm angle. You guys have all watched this. If you're standing at a stoplight, right, with your feet down, hold the front brake and start letting the clutch out, what happens? The rear end jacks up. That's the chain drive. It's literally like standing up the rear end.
And that's what pro squat and pro squat is trying to counter that or work with that. So complicated.
Yeah. So I think there's a great topic we can bring up with Mike.
Let me ask you this really quickly to his question. Are there things we do as riders that reduce mechanical grip? How I'm sitting on the bike or...
Yeah, so think about your weight, right? Let's say your bike is, for simple math, let's say your bike is 500 pounds. Let's say you're with gear. Let's say you're close to 200 pounds, right? You, on this 700-pound machine, you're a pretty big portion of that. If you were to scoot your butt back in the saddle 3 inches... right? You are moving a ton of weight back to the rear tire versus the front tire, right? So just where you put yourself physically on the bike is going to make a big difference in terms of where does the grip go, or where does the load go rather, which creates the grip. So,
and you'll see that with stunters, right? When they're trying to do a burnout, where do they sit?
Yeah,
on top of the gas tank.
Yeah, they'll scoot way up onto the gas tank as much as they can. Yeah.
So those are all things like, it's great question.
Yeah.